Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is March 28th, 2014. And I want to continue with our examination of the events of September 11th, 2001, which had so much impact on all aspects of life for most people on planet Earth for the 21st century. That catastrophe happened right at the beginning of the 21st century, and how appropriate that it happened at that time. Now, previously, I have shown some evidence about World Trade Centers 1 and 2, a little bit about Building 7 and World Trade Center Building 7, and also some evidence about the event that happened at the Pentagon on that tragic morning. Now we're going to look at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and try to come to some kind of understanding about what actually happened on that morning. You're going to be looking at some commentators, you're going to be looking at some videotape, you're going to be looking at some eyewitness testimony, and just things that I've collected that are freely available on the internet, but I'm trying to put it all together and make something coherent out of it. For those people who are familiar with how plane crashes look, the appearance of the plane crash site near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, is probably one of the most amazing aspects of this whole mystery, or if it really truly is anymore a mystery. One thing we must, of course, remember is that the government sticks by its story that the plane basically buried itself completely underground, just completely ran straight into the ground and buried itself, and that they have the plane. Now, this investigation we're going to do today is not going to be completely exhaustive. There are differences of opinions by the people you're going to be seeing talking, and not everyone is necessarily going to agree, because some people think that there was no plane at all involved. The Flight 93 never was anywhere near Shanksville. Other people think that the plane was shot down. And then, of course, the government came in as a cover-up because they didn't want people to know that the government shot down a civilian aircraft and presumably killed everyone on board. That would have been, of course, a catastrophe for the government with all kinds of messy problems involved when this type of thing happens. People would have been very upset, to say the least, that their relatives and friends were killed by the U.S. government. Now, I'm not going to say what I think. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but one thing we can be sure of, I think, and it's pretty clear, that no plane actually landed in that small crater near Shanksville and buried itself completely in the ground. And of course, that's where the memorial is to this day, and I haven't been there personally, but I am told that the people who conduct the visitors will explain that the plane actually buried itself in the ground. It's like the way that the two twin towers fell. You know, huge steel girdered structures falling neatly into their own footprint, exploding floor by floor into a relatively small pile of debris, spreading the rest around Manhattan. And yet, gravity essentially supposed to have done that. So there's a lot of questions that are still involved. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it important to find out the truth about 9/11? It is important because so much of the actions taken by the U.S. government and the U.S. military and other militaries and other governments around the world is directly a result of the events of 9/11. Millions of people have died. Supposedly up to 1.5 million people died in Iraq as a direct result of 9/11. I don't know how many people died in Afghanistan, and millions more exiled and their lives disrupted. We have places like Fallujah in Iraq that permanently polluted with depleted uranium, so that they're having ongoing problems with birth defects, horrific birth defects. And even the participants, the military personnel who went to Iraq and went to Fallujah and other places are suffering the effects of the depleted uranium. Not to mention the first responders at the sites of the collapse of Buildings 1 and 2, World Trade Center, and Building 7. Those first responders are also dying. They have been dying. Their lungs just horribly diseased. They were told, of course, that the sites, the collapse sites or the explosion sites, the World Trade Center 1 and 2 were safe. They went in there and they spent months trying to get the places cleaned up, including, everything just blasted to pieces, including human beings. They didn't find very many complete bodies, just parts, small body parts. Someone said nothing much bigger than a telephone book was found of most of the World Trade Centers. And you have the pictures of the beams, being dragged up out of the ground months later, still red and dripping hot metal. Just, you might wonder how would that happen? Well, there's explanations for that too that will surprise you. So anyway, let's focus on Shanksville, and let's get started with the very first video, which I think is about 8 or 9 minutes.
Black boxes were 15 feet and 25 feet into the ground.
that was very interesting. And, you know, this is what researchers do. They get into the minutia of it, but sometimes the minutia is really what makes a difference and can be very convincing for certain members of the public. Because if the story were true, then even the minutia would not become an anomaly. It would actually fit right in, and the puzzle, just like a jigsaw puzzle, every piece would fit in. And this is what we find over and over and over, that the puzzle pieces simply do not fit in. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Airplane crash over on Lambertsville Road, and probably had a terrorist bomb on board. It blew up. Don't know anything more than that. That's what I heard on the scanner. I just saw the smoke come up, and the explosion shook the house clear over here, and we are, what, 15 miles from Lambertsville. And it shook the heck out of the house. I don't know what else is happening. They ran one into the Pentagon and into the World Trade Center, and we're watching it on TV, and this one happened. Got a great big black cloud just mushroomed right up into the air, and it shook the house, shook everybody's houses. I wonder if there's anything left of Lambertsville. That was approximately 3 minutes after 10 Tuesday.
Okay. Okay, the reason I showed that is because that's a new one that I have not seen before, by an amateur, obviously, who grabbed his camera and caught the sort of the tail end of the explosion in Shanksville. So we know something exploded there. He said the house shook. And all right, so let's move on to the next one.
I was just driving along here. It was a beautiful day. Had my window open, had this stereo on, and when I got up here almost to the stop sign, this small white plane, at the time, that's what I thought it was, went over top of me. It was so smooth, and it just glided right over me, just like that. And then I ducked, and when I looked up again, then it was the spoiler, which is what I call it. And it was tipped like this so I could really see the spoiler. And then it just banked to the right and went over and went down behind those trees. We got to watching it on TV, and they kept saying that it was a large plane, like a 757. And I was like, no. What I saw was no jet. You know, that would have blown me off the road if it went over me, you know, that close. I said, no, that wasn't it. So, like I said, about 11:30 that night, the FBI came, wanted to talk to me. They kept asking me how big the plane was. I said the plane, you know, it was small, wasn't much bigger than my van that I saw, and that it went over top of me. And he says, you don't know what a 757 looks like. And I said, you know, don't be condescending to me. You know, if you don't want to believe me, that's fine. But what I saw, I thought I should report. And you ought to know there was something else in the air at the same time this was going on, and you want to make sure maybe it was ours and not somebody else's. And then that's when he did seem to get a little nicer. Told me that it was a white Learjet. Someone was taking pictures. I said, before the crash? And he says, well, we got to go. And that was the end of it.
In my mind, you know, the possibility that Flight 93 was shot down, you know, is an incredible story. But on the other hand, I think in the minds of a lot of media people, TV producers, etc., this story that emerged instead of heroism by the passengers is a remarkable story. You know, certainly it's been the basis for 2 best-selling books so far. It's was featured on Dateline, NBC, and some of these other news magazine shows several times over. I'm sure, and I hate to be so crass in referring to September 11th, but I'm sure the ratings for those shows, I'm sure those were some of the most watched news magazine shows of the year. And so then I think as journalists, unfortunately it's kind of sad, but I think there's an instinct of, we have a great story here. Why would we want to muck around and mess it up by coming up with a different story when people love this story?
That's the book from Todd's wife, Lisa. I haven't finished it yet, but there's a lot of information in here, especially the let's roll part, where that's from the phone call that Lisa got from her husband before he crashed, and all she heard was the let's roll, and it was silence, just like the heavens were talking to her. Have you seen the book?
This is the role the government plays in times of stress, how they view the public. Can the public stand the truth? Or shouldn't we need a legend at this point. We need a really neat story of reacting against such a dastardly act as was happening. So it's really nice and convenient to think of the Beamer story, let's roll, and that becomes just like the Alamo. And it's just one of those legends, and I'm not saying that somebody's issued an order somewhere that says don't do any more with 93, it's right where it ought to be, and leave it alone. I don't think that's true, but I think there'll be a lot of pressure to let the legend stay where it is.
Okay. Sorry you got cut off on the end, so we can't hear exactly what he said, but I think you get the point, is that there are witnesses out there that did not see a huge jetliner come screaming down from the sky and plow into the earth. What that woman described was something very different. She described it as a small plane. Now, there are all kinds of very powerful missiles that are small and do look a little bit like airplanes. They do have wings, small wings, that are extremely accurate, and so it's possible that what she saw was actually a missile, and that would explain the lack of airplane parts at the scene of the crash. Let's move on to the next one.
On TV, and the lights flickered in the building. About that time we heard the engines roar, and we took off out of the building. As we were coming out from the office out through the building, the ground shook and we heard a big boom. Looked over and saw the big ball of fire up in the air. Like I said, probably within 45 seconds or a minute of impact, we were there. We were there before any firemen, any paramedics, or anybody. We were on site. When we got there, there was a plane flying up above, and he was smart. He flew straight for the sun, so you couldn't look at it and see exactly what type of plane or if it was a fighter or what it was. But we caught a glimpse of it, and as he was swinging, he was basically traveling in the same direction as the plane. I was in Atlanta, and that was this past winter. Was in Yamaha training. And I was sitting there talking. Everybody, of course, asked where you're from, introduce yourself to everybody in the classroom. And of course, now we just say Shanksville, where the plane crashed, and everybody knows where we're at. So I was sitting there talking to another guy, and I was telling about, he said, did you see the plane crash and whatever, was you there or anything? And I told him the whole story. And I was explaining to him about whenever we were standing in the office and the lights flickered and everything. And there was another gentleman sitting in the row in front of me that was retired from the Air Force. And as soon as he heard me say that, he immediately stopped me and he said, tell me this. And I told him, and he says, well, I'm retired from the Air Force. He said, that plane was shot down. And I said, why? And he said, because whenever the lights flickered, they zap the radar frequency on everything before they shoot. And he said, that's why your lights flickered. Your lights didn't flicker from the impact. Your lights flickered because they zapped the radar system before they shot it.
All right. We wish that this guy had explained what he saw when he got to the crash site ahead of anyone else, but he's probably told the story so many times that he figures he doesn't have to tell the whole story, and he just focuses on one little part of it. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, a little short one give you some shots of the crater and a comparison with other crashes of airliners. Very interesting. Let's move on to the next one.
It's September 11th. It's going to be a hot day today. The ground is hard and dry, as it usually is at this time of year. And although my lawn has had the benefit of a little water every now and then this summer, the dry field over in Shanksville, where Flight 93 allegedly crashed, wasn't so lucky, making that part of our tale even more surreal.
The official story has it the passengers revolted and took control of the plane, driving it down where it burrowed into the ground of an abandoned strip mine. Yes, they insist the 757 disappeared into the ground, which should insult the intelligence of any thinking person, but since good propaganda targets emotion, not reason, thinking has little to do with it. Compared to other jet crash sites, though, Shanksville looks nothing like one.
So without evidence, do the authorities arrive at a more realistic explanation for the crater? Not exactly. Well, if it doesn't look like a jet crash, what does it look like?
Here, NASA gives us a clue with photos of oblique meteorite impacts on the moon. According to this chart, the elongated craters are caused by meteorites striking at trajectories of less than 10 degrees from horizontal. By mirroring the images, we can see what a crater might look like if two meteorites had struck at 10-degree trajectories from opposite directions. Looks familiar, doesn't it? But we're not on the moon, at least some of us anyway, so what other projectile could cause such a gash back here on Earth?
So you were okay.
Okay, so I'm coming up here, almost to the stop sign, and this, I keep calling it a plane for lack of any other, it came down. I mean, it was like right above my van, and it went right down over my windshield because it was so low that I ducked in my van. And when I did, I shut off my radio. And that's when I knew there was no sound. And I said it out loud. I said it 2 times. Oh my God, it's going to crash. It's going to crash. It cleared those trees. So it, to my knowledge, it just seems to me it had to be below the power lines. Came in, swooped up, cleared those trees. It was fall, so it was full of leaves. No leaves moved on the trees. Nothing fell, because I kept thinking, you know, there should be like a disturbance, and it just smoothly went around. I went right over there, banked to the right, and crashed.
Did you see anything like this? Okay, this is that's the Falcon F-20. What that is that's the plane that they say in the official story was circling the area afterwards, taking photos. And you said afterwards you did see, what, 2 planes? Mm-hmm. And they were
real high, and they were just like silver triangles in this, white triangles.
Okay, so
they were real shiny.
They didn't look like this, though.
No.
See,
I mean, they were real high, but they just looked like those. I would call it a fighter jet because that's what it looked like.
Yeah, with the wings back. And,
yeah, it was just
like
it was just a triangle in the sky, and it was really high.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that because there's an article about you in American Free Press, and they said you identified the plane as being this here's an A-10 Thunderbolt. It's called a Warthog, and they actually said that you called the white plane, which you saw what we were talking about back there that went over that this was what flew over your van, according to you.
No.
I just wanted to clarify
look how small that area is.
I see it, and there's no way. This thing's got like a 60-foot wingspan.
No. It was no wider than my van. And I mean, I have told that. And I mean, my husband and I went up, we measured it, we sent measurements to people. You know, no, it was not anything like that. Because look, I mean, that's, you know, you can see in the picture, like the rivets and everything. There was nothing. This was pure molded white fiberglass.
Definitely wasn't a Thunderbolt.
Nope, nothing like that.
And definitely wasn't a F-20 Falcon.
Nope.
The AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, or JSAM. At 14 feet long with a wingspan of about 8 feet, the JSAM fits the description of a terrain-hugging small white plane to a T. If I had never seen one before and witnessed one fly over my van, I would probably think it was a small white plane too. JSAMs are air-launched, which explains the 2 fighter jets Susan described seeing at a high altitude. The JSAM is extremely accurate and can be configured with a 900-pound dense metal penetrating warhead which measures 12 by 60 inches. This warhead is designed for punching through hardened targets such as concrete bunkers. Therefore, the hard, dry, rocky soil of Shanksville would be child's play, explaining how the wing gash was made, with the warhead detonation accounting for the crater in the center. Even the Shanksville explosion plume indicates an ordnance blast, not a jet crash. The use of cruise missiles fits the damage evidence as well as the eyewitness testimony and provides a much better explanation for the Shanksville crater than does a 757. If I can come up with this much circumstantial evidence after browsing the web for a few hours, imagine what the FBI could do. And what could motivate these people to hold memorials? No jet made that gash in the ground, and missiles don't carry passengers, so why the ceremony? Because propaganda works, that's why. And it's important to keep the wound fresh so the outrage doesn't fade, else the support for the wars might fade too.
What began with Bush is now being continued by Obama, who 4 years ago promised to end the wars and stop the torture, something I'm sure a lot of you would like to forget. Leaders from any political party who shed crocodile tears for the fictional dead deserve ridicule, not respect. Voting has accomplished nothing, as the last 12 years should make abundantly evident. Nothing will change unless we change it. If you sincerely hope for change, you'll find a way to make it happen, but speaking the truth is a good place to start. And that is, anyone who claims a 757 can disappear into the ground is either lying or a fool. But it's up to you to stop believing them. So on this September 11th, try something different. Try the truth. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all the video that I have for today, but I guess the question is, you've seen the events that supposedly took place at Shanksville from several different perspectives. Various witnesses. I believe that the blonde-haired, middle-aged woman may have been the same woman, giving two different interviews, but her interview, although it touched on somewhat slightly different aspects of what she saw on 9/11, I think basically she was essentially telling the same story about the small white plane that went over the treetops and then down, crashing and exploding. So what are we to make of this? Are we going to continue to believe the legend, as one commentator quips? The legend sometimes is much more dramatic, much more interesting, much more inspiring. We have the film, which they showed a short clip from, which I think was called Flight 93, which basically tells the story, which is the legend, of Flight 93. This is the one in which the passengers were not passive victims, but fought back. They turned the tables on the villainous Muslims with the box cutters who had hijacked the airplane and were planning to fly it into, we're not sure what. Maybe Building 7, maybe the White House, who knows. But at any rate, the legend goes that they overpowered their oppressors, the four or the three or four hijackers, and somehow the plane lost control and crashed. And therefore, they were heroes because although they sacrificed their own lives, they possibly saved hundreds, if not thousands, of other lives, thwarting the plans of these villainous terrorists who were going to use the 757 as a bomb and fly it into a building somewhere. So you have the cell phone calls. There were several cell phone calls made, and one of them most famously in which the caller tells his loved one, we're about to try to take over the plane, and so let's go and let's roll. And then the audio goes blank, and his wife or whoever he was talking to, I forget, doesn't hear anything more. And Let's Roll became really, really famous. You saw the woman holding the book called Let's Roll, which tells the legend, tells the story from, I guess, her perspective. You have the Neil Young song, great song, very talented songwriter, called Let's Roll, and it's right up there with the best of his wonderful songs. So it's very dramatic, and it's inspiring too, because it gives the American people that impetus to be aggressive, to be warlike, to be brave, self-sacrificing, And it's sort of implanted in our minds that we can do this, that we can beat these terrorists, and all we have to do is just get aggressive, get out there and stand up on our own 2 feet, and we can overcome these terrorists who are trying to take our freedoms. And all our politicians to this very day still reference 9/11 whenever, particularly whenever they're pushed into a corner and asked direct questions. Why are we in Afghanistan? Why did we attack Iraq? Why do we want to go into Iran? Why are we supporting these rebels in Egypt, in Syria? Why did we attack Libya? And always, when pressed, they always bring up 9/11. Yeah, but they hit us on 9/11. You wouldn't want that to happen again, would you? And I've even heard some of them say, you can almost guarantee, I can guarantee you that we will be hit again unless we keep up the pressure on Al-Qaeda and we keep them knocked back on their heels. And you would much rather be fighting in the streets of Libya or the deserts of Syria or Iran or Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the other countries that the United States and CIA and NATO are covertly operating in, and there's many, many, many of them. You would rather have them fighting there, wouldn't you, than fighting in every town USA, fighting in San Francisco, fighting in New York, fighting in Chicago, fighting in Columbus, Ohio, fighting in Atlanta, Georgia. You wouldn't want to see that, would you? Well, actually, the U.S. military is actually training for this very thing. They have built a city, a mock city, very elaborate, with churches, houses, stores, streets, street lights that work. A whole city is built by the U.S. government in which U.S. troops train to fight urban warfare in American towns. So they're training for this. In fact, they expect this to happen in the next few years. And then we hear, just recently, of course, that Iran has announced that it is going to be, guess what, training Westerners to go into America and other Western countries and be sleeper cells, and then when they're given the signal, they will revolt. They will be activated. They will become suicide bombers or terrorists or bombers or whatever, and therefore, and they will not be Muslims. They will be Westerners, presumably non-Muslims, white Christians, maybe libertarians, maybe conservatives, maybe Republicans, or any other group that might have an issue with the direction that the United States policy, both foreign and domestic, is going at this very moment, the direction, the trajectory for the 21st century. This is what the powers that be are training to protect the American people from. And so, and of course there have been laws already put in place. You can look on the web and the government website. You could read about the laws against domestic terrorism, and they describe what the future holds, as if they know the future. And why are they so confident that they know the future? You know, they're preparing. They're spending millions, billions of dollars preparing for operations within the boundaries of the United States. They expect to have warfare in the streets of the United States at some point in the future. And I don't know how many years they expect, whether it's 5 years, 2 years, or 10 years. but they are definitely planning for it. And why are they planning for it? Why? Because they have the inside track, because they are so incredible at gathering intelligence that they can look into the future and see what Al-Qaeda is planning, that Al-Qaeda is actually planning to maybe turn young boys, maybe young women too, who are sitting at home in front of their computer with their propaganda on the internet into terrorists. Well, they actually have already said this, and they're going to say this in the future, that kids are being radicalized because they're reading conspiracy theories and looking at these radical websites on their computers. And they're being radicalized to the point where they would be willing to strap a bomb onto themselves and go out and blow something up. And it seems to me that, and it seems to a lot of other people, that there's something going on here. What is going on here? Why would they be so sure? Perhaps, might it be possible that they themselves are spreading this propaganda and hoping that the enormous military budget will be bolstered by this new threat? Remember, it's an age-old maxim that in order to survive, a totalitarian government must have an enemy. And preferably, it must have an exterior enemy, and it must have an interior enemy. Otherwise, it cannot survive. There's an enemy at the gates, and there's an enemy in our midst, and we must be constantly vigilant, because we never know when that enemy could strike, and the enemy could be your neighbor, could be your relative, could be your friend, could be the man down the street, could be your colleague at work, could be that sleeper cell. They're not Muslim, they don't have dark skins, they don't have dark hair and beards. And that's how Al-Qaeda is working within people, and people who talk against the government, they could be terrorists. They could be domestic terrorists. They need to be watched. They need to be reported. See something, say something. But if it's something like 9/11, if we see an anomaly or a problem or an issue with 9/11 or Oklahoma City or the JFK assassination, or how about John Jr.'s mysterious death in a private plane in which he just crashed into the ocean with his wife and sister-in-law and died. John Jr., John Fitzgerald Kennedy's young son, who was so brilliant and so handsome and so accomplished and so intelligent, and reportedly was beginning to think about going into politics. This is a family, of course, that is very interested in politics and helping people and doing what's right. And now he's gone forever, folks, gone forever, just like his uncle Bobby Kennedy. We know Edgar Kennedy never had a shot at the presidency after Chappaquiddick, where his car went off the bridge. The young lady drowned. He escaped, was dazed and confused. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe it had nothing to do. Maybe he wasn't set up. We don't know for sure. I think some people have some pretty interesting theories about what really happened to Edward Kennedy. But again, he is neutralized and made into a bit of a buffoon in Congress, spends the rest of his life in Congress fighting for liberal causes, but never even attempts to be president, because he knows that this black mark on his record could never be expunged. So who knows how these things go? But of course, we do know that people do get destroyed politically, if not physically. And over and over and over and over we see it. It's not just America that does this. Other countries do it as well. It's very common in Russia. The honey trap is a really common way of destroying the reputation of a politician who the people who are truly in charge of the government want to neutralize. They don't kill him. Sometimes they do kill him. But sometimes if he's susceptible to that type of thing, they will get him. They will film him with a couple of prostitutes. I've seen this. And therefore, then they play it on television. So everybody can see this actually happened in Russia not that long ago. And so there's all kinds of dirty tricks that are played on people. And the world is not something we can take at face value and immediately just assume that everything we're hearing on television is necessarily true. And what I think we do have to understand is that inside of every human being is the truth. What is keeping us alive is the truth. It's really important. And this is our true purpose, is to understand that the exterior world is an illusion, and that our very aliveness by itself is the actual and true purpose that we have for being alive on planet Earth. And we should enjoy that, appreciate that, learn as much about what's going on in our internal world as we possibly can, because that's where it really, really counts. The rest is just smoke and mirrors, much of it. So that's all there is for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.